So this is the post-pandemic youth sports panel, and a little optimistic with the title of the panel. I know we're not really post-pandemic yet. We're getting there, hopefully, fingers crossed. But we're going to dive into a number of different topics. And just to introduce our guests, we have Renata Simro. She's the president and CEO of the LA 84 Foundation. Welcome, Renata. And then we also have Jerry Royster, the newest member of our Steel Sports Advisory Board. And Jerry is a former MLB player, manager, and he is currently the head baseball coach at Sierra Canyon High School in California. So a couple California people with us
today. Jerry's out my way.
And then, of course, last but not least, Steve Jones, the Senior Vice President of the Steel Sports Coaching System. So again, appreciate you guys being here with me today. Let's jump in. I did the introductions. Everyone heard them, obviously, except me. Now let's jump into it. So I wanted to start with a positive, because I know this topic can skew a little negative when we talk about the pandemic and everything that's going on with it. But I would like, Renata, let's start with you. If you could just tell a story about perseverance, just anything from the youth sports world that you're in, from teams, from organizations that you've seen during the pandemic.
Yeah, sure. I'll talk about my own organization in terms of perseverance and, how we made, I like to say, don't let a crisis go to waste. And when we were at the height of the pandemic and schools were closed and kids were isolating, as an organization that provides resources to community-based and school-based organizations, it dawned on me with my own 14-year-old, where I went to the garage and pulled out our table tennis and, footballs and soccer balls and volleyballs. And, we were doing recess in the backyard, that the kids that we serve in communities that are under-resourced, didn't have that opportunity because they were cut off from their community-based programs and their school-based programs. And so we pivoted, called some friends at Dick's Sporting Goods, at Nike, at Cole Imports, and we were able to source over 120,000 pieces of play equipment and distributed them through the LAUSD, our school system, our school districts, food distribution line. And I have to tell you, the amount of gratitude and, warmth that the families and the kids in particular felt by getting a, Laker ball or jump rope, just warmed our hearts. And there was one young kid, we had a distribution issue and the truck was a little bit late, that I told him, I said, come back, because we're going to have some basketballs to give away. And he lived in the neighborhood and he waited patiently. And the smile on his face when he got that basketball, just warmed our heart, and was so grateful that we were able to provide so many, play equipment opportunities for kids in the communities that we serve. And then we called on some of our friends at the sports teams and said, kids are struggling right now, so can you, give them words of wisdom? So Aaron Donald, might I say the Rams are in the Super Bowl, but Aaron Donald, did videos of showing how he works out with, some socks in his tennis shoes, and, encouraging kids to stay active and stay strong. And so that's, what I've held on to throughout the pandemic, is the joy on the faces that we were able to provide so many kids.
Renata, I'll have to tell you, I grew up in Cincinnati, so I'm a huge Bengals fan. So I don't know if it's going to be coming out, but maybe the two of us, we can have an internal bet.
It's
on. Jerry, let's hear a story from you.
Well, first and foremost, I'm a 49er fan. I'm not very happy with either one of you guys. But on a more positive note than the 49ers losing a game that they should have won, let's talk about the pandemic a little bit. And my experience, one of the things I wanted to talk about is when the pandemic hit, it hit my family almost immediately. Fortunately, and God's will, we did not lose anyone to the pandemic. But so I was in the mindset of getting something for my family to be able to do. I wanted to make sure that we can that we weren't sitting at home. We weren't just kind of wasting away in the house. And I found a couple of things to do. I do have a grandchild that is autistic, so we weren't able to really be around people. They weren't really able to be around me. So it was pretty tough, but I found a spot that that I could go to, and I was able to share that spot down in the Palm Springs area. I was to share that spot with my baseball team. Like Renata, we did not shut down. We were fortunate enough in being in baseball outdoors, taking the necessary precautions. We were able to continue to play and be productive. But the place that I found, I was able to share with some of my players and their families, and eventually started going to this place. And before you know it, we had a pretty good group of people that were heading to this one spot where you can kind of go and be outdoors and not really be around people, but it was safe and a way of communicating with people during a time when not much communication was going on around here.
Very good. Jonesy, do you have a quick story, and then we'll move on? I got some other questions, obviously, but go ahead.
Yes, I actually am going to look at it from a slightly different lens than I normally do. And I'm going to give a lot of credit to the fact that many parents, and two people here who I respect a great deal have already raised this, spent more time with their children, with their families. And I think the whole youth sports landscape has been looked at in a different lens. And I think a lot of parents are now realizing the real benefits that their kids are going to get from youth sports is the social, as well as the mental and physical benefits from it. And now people and parents want their kids in programs that are going to help them do that. And I think what's ultimately going to happen is youth sports are going to have to adapt to serve those that need it, underserved areas that Renata mentioned, but also even those areas that we consider affluent, well-to-do, middle class. Those parents are now looking for an organization that gives them more than a promise, a false one, of a scholarship. You know, is my child going to develop as a human being? Are they going to learn the life lessons that they should? So for me, I'm going to give credit to parents who resourcefully engage with their own kids. And going forward, I think are going to have a much higher standard of expectation from what we give children when they participate in sports. I think that is one of the major benefits that's going to come out of COVID.
Have we sort of a wake-up call in terms of have organizations, schools, governments, have they seen the need to invest in youth sports, since we've gone into the pandemic, in a way to provide more opportunities and more access to kids of all demographics?
Let me take that one and underscore what Jonesy said. I mean, you're 100% right. As we see, across the country, a recentering sport and play as an essential element of childhood well-being. So it's not just about the X's and O's. So if you look at, the privilege and the affluent, where it's the travel teams, the club teams, there's been this win at all cost mentality, versus the underserved communities that we serve. It's more of an access and opportunity to those resources and to those play opportunities. I think across both those spectrum, you see a priority for sport in terms of the team building, the relationship building, the connection with your coach, the opportunity to express yourself physically, and dealing with mental stress and anxiety. And I think when you look at the positive life benefits that sports provide, I think to Jonesy's point, that is what is the opportunity to reimagine youth sport. I think on the funding piece, we haven't seen yet a tremendous amount of funding for sport and play specifically, but we have seen increased funding, both nationally and certainly in the state of California under Governor Newsom, of expanded learning. So after school programs that include sport. And I think, organizations like Steel Sport, like the L84 Foundation and Play Equity, as well as those across the country, have a responsibility and lean in and really to use this moment to talk about the transformational benefits that sport and play provide beyond just winning and the X's and O's. So I think Jonesy's is 100% right. And this is our moment to come together as a community to continue to elevate the role that sport plays in kids' lives.
And you mentioned the win at all costs mentality. Is positive development needed now more than ever? In a sense, has the tone shifted from that win at all cost mentality to more of fun, positivity, learning? Certainly athletes and coaches, they want to win, but has the tone shifted a bit?
I think it needs to be. I think it needs to be addressed more. Obviously, I just got on board with Steel Sports, but I know exactly what they're trying to do, what they're trying to accomplish, and what their goals are. And it's much needed. I'm going to tell you, my high school is a very high-profile high school. The mentality of win at all costs comes from the travel ball teams that these kids have played on. Every one of them thinks that they're going to be the shortstop at Vanderbilt, and their parents encourage that thought, even though it's not merited. I just think that it has to come from the coaches. The coaches are the ones that are going to how that goes. Being an athlete for as long as I've been, I mean, I always want to win. I hate losing, but unfortunately, I've had the task of losing more than I wanted to. But developing of a kid, especially a 8, 10, 15-year-old kid, the development I think has to come from the coaches, and that's one thing that I've learned from a lot of people that are here with Steel Sports, and especially Tommy Lasorda. Tommy was a win at all costs. It never jeopardized the growth of any of us in order to make that happen. He would coach us to the bone, but he knew who our families were. We went to dinner. We did everything together. He learned that a team that travels together, plays together, wins together, and winning was happened a lot more often under his watch than it did with some of the other coaches. But you got to take care of the kids first. You have to teach them first.
Jerry, I think for Tommy Lasorda, there wasn't mutually exclusive. You could have a killer win at all cost mentality and still be a good kid and still have fun and joy in the sport. And I think that was the key to his success, is that he loved the game of baseball. He loved it, and he had joy every moment of the day, and he brought that out in his team and his athletes and every kid that he's touched across this country. So I don't think it's mutually exclusive. And I think it's also a responsibility of the parents as well.
100%. 100%. And what about the younger kids? And going through the Aspen Institute, the state of play, and one of the things that concerned me looking at it were the number of 6 to 10-year-olds who lost interest in sports during the pandemic. It was the highest percentage. So that's concerning to me, obviously. I mean, just thinking of the young kids that are losing interest in playing sports. So how do we encourage kids to get out more, to play? Even if it's not organized sports, how can we just get them out to just play and be active?
Well, I would say, and we referenced this morning a little, Nathan, right? Too often the choices of a young child are made by the parents, and the athlete involved in the process isn't allowed to pick that particular sport. And the early specialization that we mentioned earlier today is such an issue. It's such an issue. It's a fact of life that those people, and regardless of whether it's sports, music, business, whatever it is, those who have a wider range of experience and try many, many different things are the ones that find what Jerry found. And that was a passion and a love for a sport. And once you find that passion and love for a sport, that's what's going to propel you to be engaged in that sport, hopefully as an athlete, but beyond that, as a spectator, as a participant in the celebration of what sport really is. And so I think one of the things that we need to do is allow those young players the opportunity to play everything. We've got to take the higher moral ground. We haven't got to say, our teams, you need to play 12 months of the year with us, only this sport. No, play all the sports you want. Find the one you love. We might not have it at Steel, so we'll encourage you to go and find it where you can. But that passion is the key. If we don't give those young people the positive experience, then they're not going to stay with sport. They're going to go from one to another. They're going to reach an age where they think, I can't be good at any of them now. Everybody's so much better. And that's when they're dropping out. So at this young age, and we referenced it this morning, and I do think post-COVID, it will help that we can reset and say, all of us, take a breath, be an advocate for the child. Jerry said, kids first. It's a motto for us. Let them drive their sports experience. That'll develop the passion. That's what brings out the joy in what we do. And Jerry, I'd agree with you. All of our coaches and athletes, we're fiercely competitive, man. We want to win every game we play. And I've met Renata, and I know how competitive she is. But I think we realize there's boundaries within that. We won't compromise our core values, our mission, or the enjoyment and fun of a kid. We won't compromise those. But if we lose and get upset, that's okay. But we move on and we enjoy the sport, embrace the sport, and have the passion for it. And I do think that the sampling will help. And I do think more families are prepared to accept that in every walk of life than they were pre-COVID.
Yeah, Jones, you make me think of a personal story. My professional sports career ended in high school, and my husband was a pretty competitive athlete as well. And he didn't play in college either. And so when we had two boys, we just knew they were going to be athletes. 1 + 1 = 4. And, before they could crawl, they were in sports, but we put them in soccer, baseball, and said, you got to pick a sport, you got to play something. And, neither one of them really took. My oldest, engaged in skateboarding, but my 14-year-old 2 years ago discovered the game of indoor volleyball. My sister played, but I, wasn't really following volleyball, and he has a passion for it. And, so now as a parent, it's a double-edged sword, right? So now he's found a passion. I got to travel all over Southern California, in this club volleyball system. But his passion for it, and he said to me, Mom, why didn't you put me in volleyball earlier? You're putting me in all these traditional sports and, kept me away from something that I really enjoy. So I think, from personal experience, I can definitely attest to that. And then from a professional experience, as an organization, we fund 50 different sports. And we're very keen on our measurement and evaluation of who's participating and how they're participating. And, my great friend Tom Ferry at Aspen Institute, in his 8 plays, one of them is ask kids what they want. So when I took over the foundation about 6 years ago, and we were trying to increase girls' participation, because Nathan, in those statistics, that girls are dropping out at a faster rate than boys, particularly around middle school. So in a middle school program we have with our school district, we asked them what they wanted to play, and volleyball, was the sport. And so the year and a half after we instituted volleyball as a new sport, we had 128% increase in girls' participation.
Wow.
Nice.
So the simple tone of asking and then providing a variety of sports for kids to sample, I think is critically important, because not all kids, are interested or have the body build, for a basketball, for a football, for a volleyball. Another example is rugby. We were one of the first foundations to support Rugby USA, and a large percentage of African-American girls have engaged in the sport because their body type is conducive to the sport of rugby. So definitely specialization, sampling of a variety of sports, but it gets back to resources and being able to offer a variety of sports so that kids can, try to see what they're good at.
Yeah, it's not just providing opportunities, but a wide range of opportunities, and listening to the kids and understanding, what they want to participate in.
That's right.
And Renata, what have you seen? What's the impact been on underserved communities, from the pandemic, and what can we do to help support those that have been affected the most?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, when we formed our charitable partner, the Play Equity Fund, it was built on the premise that talent was universal, but opportunity was not, and that there was lack of access for millions of kids who are at the poverty line in urban communities, lack of park access. So there was a crisis hiding in plain sight before the pandemic, and the pandemic only widened that. And then on top of that, you have a situation where the economic issues have really hit nonprofit organizations hard, who were providing community-based programs. They weren't able to do their fundraising. They were isolated. They weren't able to do their bake sales. And so a lot of, nonprofit organizations who are providing support for, 20 to 100 kids are struggling. Then you've got the labor issues, COVID issues in terms of the vaccination rate, that we see communities across this country, in low income, BIPOC populations, communities of color, have less access than they did before. And so we see is that we need to double down and that we all have a responsibility to lean in where we can. Your coach a community-based program, participate in an after-school program. I'm sure that there's organizations for folks, who are across this country, boys and girls clubs, YMCAs. If you don't know, shoot me an email at renata@la84.org or check our website, and we'll definitely connect you with the program that can help. But it certainly we need to double down. We need to continue to speak about the important role that sport plays, because people still think it is a bygone conclusion that all kids have access to sport, and that's just not true. And it's going to take a collective, aligned, collaborative effort from all of those who care about sports, who are proximate to sport, who are in sport, who are working with foundations, to find ways of giving of your time, talent, and treasures to help make sure every kid, has an opportunity to play. Because I think it is, as I know, Jonesy, you guys are working on in terms of, the philosophy of coaching to parents and to executives. When you think about the team environment and the life skills that kids get through sport, they make the best employees. So as we're talking about, how to transition this labor shortage that we have, I know one of my questions when I ask any employee that I hire, did you play team sports? Because I know exactly what I'm going to get from an employee in terms of them being able to, meet the task, and in some cases exceed the task if they're as competitive as we are on this call. So definitely a need for us all to lean in where we can.
Speaking on that, Major League Baseball, which I'm still involved on a small basis, but I do these events for a couple of the organizations that they formed, the Breakthrough Series, the Dream Series, and both of those are kind of formed. They were formed to serve underserved kids and communities that don't have the access that Renata was talking about. It's access to my school. My school costs $40,000 to go to school a year, and we are pre-K through 12, and the pre-K kids, they don't have to pay $40,000. They have to pay $18,000 to go to our school. So what I'm most proud of is that the school is trying to underserved areas and are trying to go into some of the lower income areas and bring in kids and scholarship them. And if some of these kids that can't afford that kind of money are chipping in and sponsoring kids. It's so nice to see it happening. And when it does happen, and you're able to see these kids thrive in environments that they're not used to, I mean, there's no more joy. Nothing brings more joy to my face than seeing an underserved kid having some success in school, academically and athletically. It's a big problem. It's a big problem because there's way too many areas that are underserved and kids that are getting left out and falling through the cracks. But we all have to step in and do our part. Major League Baseball has tried during the pandemic, but those organizations that I mentioned earlier, they had to downsize instead of bringing up more, they downsized. So now that things are a little bit better and we kind of know how to maneuver through this pandemic a little bit better, these kids now, those numbers are going back up, and I think we're on the right track, but there's a lot of help needed.
Jerry, we see the same thing of, an increase in the private schools here. I mean, Sierra Canyon and the recruiting that you guys do, Chaminade, Mater Dei. The unintended consequence of that is the former public powerhouses for, baseball and sports like Crenshaw and Dorsey are having a hard time fielding a football team, so that there is a baseball team as well. And so while it's great for those kids, there's still work to be done to anchor up, the public schools, to keep kids engaged in sport activity, either, on the team sport as an intramural or even an after school sports program. So, I encourage, those who are listening to look at opportunities to help anchor and shore up the public schools who are having a hard time fielding and keeping sports activities for kids alive.
Jerry, I was going to ask you, as a coach, have you adapted your coaching style since the pandemic started? And also, it may be forced in a way because you may not be able to get together and practice and with restrictions and things like that. So if anything, how have we used the internet as well to get to the athletes and give them workouts and just expand that communication with them?
Well, we're at the point where some of the kids are still home. They still don't come to practice, and even though we are kind of, I want to say full strength, but there are kids that parents who still won't let their kids even come back to practice. And yes, I have changed because I have to learn how to coach those kids as opposed to give them the stigma of not being a team player because they're not coming out during a pandemic. I try to talk with the parents. I try to talk with the players. I try to talk with the players that are actually at the field and try to get them to understand why this kid's wearing a mask and another kid isn't, or one kid's at home and one kid isn't. Even in the last, let's say, 3 weeks or so, we've had kids that have opted out of school because there were way too many cases coming up. When I say way too many, not enough to really shut down, but within different sports teams, having 3 or 4 kids come down with COVID. A lot of it's because they have traveled or they've done something other than what they do with their respective sports. But my style has changed because I got to make sure that everybody's included and also try to prepare them for a season that starts in 10 days.
And on the subject of getting to people through the internet, through social media, Renata, what about your coach education and the clinics that you have with LA 84 Foundation? Have you been doing virtual clinics? And what's the plan as hopefully we get out of this pandemic for your coach education?
Yeah, there are. It's less because of I think it's as Jerry outlined it. You've got a sort of a mixed bag. You're back in school. Some are opting out because of the rise in cases, and some programming is happening, but not full programming. We're anticipating, our school district and community partners are going to be fully open in the summertime months. And so I think right now we're looking at hybrid, where you have, virtual coaches education engaging with the kids. But I have to tell you, it's inadequate, for some kids. You asked, has coaching changed? Absolutely. It's changed because kids for, going on 2 years now, have had this roller coaster ride of inconsistency and uncertainty. The isolation has really put a heightened level of stress and anxiety on, young people across the board. Teenage suicide is at its highest rate ever, suicide ideation rate, and it's happening at a younger age in terms of emergency room visits. So we're, in a crisis in our social emotional health. And I know Jonesy can speak to this, is coaches have to first anchor and connect with the kids so they can reconnect with themselves, reconnect with joy before they can even get on the field and think about running a play. And I'd be interested, Jonesy, in terms of how you guys have adjusted your coaching education to deal with that. We certainly have, through our partners like Up to Us, and I should mention other coaching organizations, but really focusing on the social emotional competencies and trauma-informed coaching to really help anchor the kids, in their sense of community and team environment before we even get to the X's and O's.
Yeah, it's been very challenging, Renata. And by the way, mention as many coaching organizations as you like. We encourage our coaches, all the people on this call, to go out and learn from other organizations because we're all just sharing the same information for the benefit of the athletes.
That's right.
We were actually on the path to doing blended learning with our coaches before the pandemic hit. So, we had 3 areas we had to address: the coaching engagement, keeping them engaged with us, the athletes' engagement, and the parent engagement. And I am blown away by how successful we've been. So what happened is, our coaches are already on online learning, and since the pandemic kind of hit for us, end of 2019, right? So we created 40 online modules for the athletes to participate in. Just independently go in, look at them, pick, do what they like. We've had 5,216 athlete completions since November 2019. That's an average of over 200 a month. But here's something, Renata and Jerry, that really struck me. The most popular course that the athletes chose wasn't how to score goals, how to defend, hitting, catching in baseball. The most popular by a mile, mental resilience part 1 and 2. The kids chose that. Nearly 350 of the kids enrolled in that themselves. No guidance to do so. They went in, they looked at the 40. They're telling us, we're struggling. We need help. We need help. We need to connect. Prior to the COVID issue, Renata, we did work with the Search Institute. 20% of kids prior to COVID didn't have a positive relationship with an adult in their life. 2 out of every 10 kids. Imagine what that number is now. So we train our coaches specifically. How do you develop a positive relationship? Well, you share power with kids. You listen to them. You challenge them. They want to be challenged. You express care for them. You increase the opportunities they might not have. These are tangible things you can do. But we managed to engage over 5,000 teachable units online. I was flabbergasted. I'm very proud of what we did. But then the other thing we did, which I thought was really unique and useful, we engaged our parents. I'm going to say this, and although it's probably politically controversial, we lacked leadership. The CDC, the WHO, even the states individually, they just didn't give consistent leadership and weren't prepared to say, we don't know all the answers. They just came up sometimes with some ridiculous scenarios. What we did was we invited parents to join a task force. So we got an epidemiologist, expert in disease from LA. We got a New York State Board health director of the COVID precautions in New York. We got a neurologist from Pennsylvania, and then we got a pharmaceutical head who was in charge of their whole country, the whole country's protocols for COVID. We came up with guidelines for our families, and we shared them, created by these experts who are parents within the organization. And we've updated those 9 times. And we've got buy-in from parents now who look to us for guidance before they sometimes look to their regions and their states and everybody else. So we managed to successfully navigate it, partly because we were on that course. But the thing that blows me away is the kids are telling us, listen to the kids. They're telling us what they need. When 350 of them voluntarily, independently enroll in this course about mental resilience, they're telling us they're struggling. They've struggled through this pandemic. And when I first started seeing them back on the fields, the social skills were, oh my goodness, it was woeful. Never mind teamwork, just talking to one another. Kids wouldn't even look at each other in the eye. And so there's a lot of work still to be done. One of the things I really enjoyed was some psychologists and child psychiatrists and experts we had in the club who have said the medical people are realizing the lack of participation in sports is a bigger mental issue than a physical one. The emotional and social learning isn't taking place because there's no informal interaction with their peers. And so that's what we've got to do. And that's what we're going to focus on.
And Josie, there's a RAND study that just came out. I'll send it to you. The number one priority of a lot of school districts is socio-emotional competencies, is how they have resources and tools to build that socio-emotional competency for their kids. And just one plug for us is we, in terms of how we're people are rallying. There was we were talking about how we're rallying and how we're supporting. Is I have to say is that the sport community in Los Angeles has stepped up in a big way, and I know some of our partners across the country are doing the same thing. But we formed a partnership with the host committee that brings on all these major sporting events. Like the Super Bowl is coming in a couple of weeks, and the college football playoffs. And one of the conversations we're having in terms of that legacy is that we know that there is something transformational about sport and the coach. So can we bring those competencies to the classroom when you think about, the social-emotional competencies that you get through sport? And I think, Jonesy, when you talk about resiliency too, is that, it's frustrating for me in that the class goes to the, the yogas and that's all great. Don't get me wrong, because you've got to have a variety of options for kids. But when you think about the construct of a sport team, you've got the built-in coach that's well trained beyond the X's and O's as we talked about, but you've got that team dynamic where you have a positive affiliation with kids' needs to thrive in any environment. And then you also have the ability to develop resiliency or grit. And it is simply that connection between hard work and results. And Jerry, it makes me think about, you and I being highly competitive, is to say I'm highly competitive and I lose. The resiliency is how that coach brings that kid back up mentally to develop that mental toughness. That doesn't mean they're defined by that mistake. That doesn't mean that they're a failure, but it means how do you work on your weakness to become better? And once kids are able to get through that more often, then they see, oh, I'm able to develop that mental toughness, that resiliency that has applications off the field for me to navigate those challenges that I face. And so we're trying to, find ways, and I think, Jonesy, it might be an opportunity for the Steel sports coaching system, is how do you take that coaching philosophy and how they develop social emotional competencies and put that in the classroom to equip the teachers to be able to bring the best of the athletes out in that way as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think we have time for one more question. I know we're supposed to wrap up at 4:15, but Joe Santilli put a question, and he asked, what steps can elite travel clubs take to support the growth of community rec level organizations and just the play overall in our communities?
I'll take that because we see it. I call it the soccer mafia. And I think the challenges that recreation, park and recreations, city departments have in terms of their budget is that they lease their properties out, their fields out for these travel teams and club teams as a revenue generating source. And what that does is it leaves out, a kid with a soccer ball or a baseball bat or a ball and a glove, maybe not even a baseball bat, to just go out and have some free play, some recreation the way that I did, as a kid. And so some of the conversations that we're having, LA County, Norma Garcia, my friend that runs the LA County Park and Recreation Department, she's actually created a partnership with some of the travel teams and club teams and has gotten authorization to waive the fees for them to utilize the field in exchange for them providing participation from local kids within the community at no cost or at a very low cost. So looking at some really innovative ways in which to, make 1 + 1 = 3, if you will. And then with our school districts, our city parks and recreation department are talking to the school district because, on the weekends they're generally closed. After school, there may be a few, opportunities, and they are working on a shared or joint use agreement across all of, the school district sites to be able to open it up for programming so that we're actually expanding in an urban context like Los Angeles, looking to expand the resources and the assets that we have available. And then the third opportunity that we're seeing is with our Catholic schools. There's a large number of Catholic schools and private schools haven't been part of this conversation, Jerry, so maybe Sierra Canyon can be the first leader. But how do the Catholic schools open up their fields of play to really be able to expand those assets? And then what partnerships might they be able to engage with either community-based programs, or school-based programs that may be, not have the appropriate fields to engage their kids in playing. So those are three, very real opportunities that we're seeing and could be opportunities to scale across, other parts of the country that are having the same challenges.
Absolutely. Sierra Canyon does rent their fields out, and they rent it out to people that can pay that premium dollar. And again, like you said, it's kids are getting left out. But Steel Sports has asked me to help setting up I guess more fields that we're going to open up here pretty soon. Jonesy and I have been talking about it quite a bit, and we're opening up in an affluent area, but hopefully we are going to be able to bring kids, kids of need, and do something really positive. The one thing that first thing that they told me is they didn't want to create an atmosphere of teams that winning, only winning championships, and they want to do things and make sure that the kids that are in need are what they need and what is available to most other kids.
Yeah.
You know, one other thing, Nathan, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this, is I think being creative about ways in which to fill the gap. So as I mentioned earlier, we're managing the legacy for the Super Bowl in LA in a week or so. And we've partnered with an organization called Playworks and County Parks. They got funding for a mobile recreation unit. And so what that is basically, I don't know how many people on this call remember the ice cream truck, but when the ice cream truck, you heard that music, you would stop what you're doing. And, you know, you were mad about, you know, going out and running down the ice cream truck. So think of that same concept with the Playmobil. I mean, we're going to be launching that partnership February 10th, and running those programs through the summer, going to communities, leaving equipment, but really engaging kids in activities where they are, using some school sites, closing down some streets. So I think the opportunity to be very creative in terms of how we fill gaps in terms of, you know, lack of play space if there's not a park, or the demand that those parks have from the travel teams and club teams, you know, to lean into those opportunities where we can be creative and take play to kids, and so that they can recognize that there's opportunities for them, you know, to stay active and stay engaged in their own neighborhood. Like I used to play street football, you know, when I was growing up. So I think taking back our streets and being more creative is another way in which we can expand access and opportunities for kids.
Not only is the Super Bowl going to be here, but Major League Baseball All-Star Game is also going to be at Dodger Stadium this year. And there's just so many opportunities that are out. One of the reasons I'm so excited about Steel Sports is that one thing I know, if there seems to be an opportunity out there, you guys are, or we, I guess we could say now, we are jumping on that opportunity and making sure that we put it to work for those in need.
Fantastic. I can't thank you guys enough for joining me on the panel. I hope our staff has enjoyed this. But Renata, Jerry, thank you so much for taking a little bit of your time out of your day to join us. So thank you very much. And Jonesy, of course, thanks to you. I mean, you were kind of forced to be here anyway. So
it's never forced in this rarefied company. Absolutely brilliant to spend time with Jerry and Renata. I really appreciate you both. Thank you so much for helping our staff.
No, Jonesy, it's my pleasure anytime. Jerry, it's a pleasure to be with you, and Nathan, you know, great conversation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
All right, be well. Go Rams.